ask if can you share some updates, if any, about Isra and how she's doing, and did she move to Syria?
Thanks.
Sorry.
Primero que nada, ¿podrías compartirnos alguna actualización sobre Isra, cómo le está yendo y si se volvió a vivir a Siria?
Isra is really good at the moment. She's I was just with her in New York actually. She's still living in Germany. She would love to move back to Syria at some point, but they're still very concerned about the security situation there and the state of life for children in Syria. So for the moment they're staying in Germany, but it's still a dilemma for them what they want to do.
Bueno, Isra está muy bien, la acabo de ver en Nueva York, aún vive en Alemania, le encantaría volver a Siria en algún momento, pero todavía les preocupa la seguridad, las condiciones de vida para los niños, todavía es un dilema para ellos.
It's such a beautiful movie, and I'm just wondering, how did you, I know it's a little bit in the film, but like, how did you meet Isra, and like, what was the choice for you and your co-director to decide to spend this much time making a film about one person?
Well,
Tengo varias preguntas, obviamente al ver la película pues genera muchos cuestionamientos, es una película muy bella, pero primero que nada, o sea, ¿cómo conociste a Isra? ¿Cómo fue la decisión tuya y de tu co-director de dedicar tanto tiempo a hacer una película sobre una persona?
So yeah, the first part of that question, we were in Izmir, in this place, Basmani Square, where all the refugees were congregating in order to meet smugglers who could take them to Europe. And we spent a long time there, and we wanted to film something about the refugee crisis, film this journey that people were making. And we met a few different people, but we never really had the chance to get to know them and to understand them before they started making these journeys. And we eventually started getting interested in the people who weren't just there to meet a smuggler and go. We became interested in the people who were selling things on street corners, and we tried sort of briefly. We worked with a boy who was doing that, and that sort of, he ended up not being that interested in the filming process. And then suddenly we met Isra, who was just so instantly charming, and we just loved. And also she was just so enthusiastic about it. She just loved the idea of being a spokesperson and being able to show us around this place, and she loved being this sort of grown-up thing of being in a documentary.
En cuanto a la primera parte de la pregunta, bueno, estábamos en Izmir, en la plaza de Basmani, donde estaban todos los refugiados o un gran grupo congregados esperando a las personas que los iban a llevar a Europa, pues de contrabando, y queríamos filmar algo sobre la crisis de refugiados y las personas que hacen este trayecto. Conocimos a varias personas, pero no los pudimos conocer o entender realmente antes de que hicieran el viaje. Entonces, bueno, empezamos con un interés por las personas que no solamente estaban ahí para realizar el viaje, sino, por ejemplo, empezamos a ver a los que vendían cosas en la calle, empezamos a trabajar con un niño en este sentido, pero al final no le interesó tanto la película. Y después, de repente, conocimos a Isra, que nos fue encantadora al instante, le entusiasmó mucho, le encantó la idea de ser como una vocera, mostrarnos este proceso, y además le parecía algo muy adulto aparecer en un documental.
Thanks. And then for the second half of the question, really, which is the big question, is we filmed the journey, and the journey was so powerful, but at that time there was such a big conversation going on in the media about this million-strong exodus of refugees to Europe, and there was a lot being said on either side of the argument that wasn't very nuanced, and we didn't feel was very informed and very sensitive to the realities of what refugees were going through. And we realized at the same time that we'd become very attached to Isra, and we'd become very close. We knew we were going to go and keep seeing her, and that we wanted her to still be part of our lives. And so those two ideas sort of came together in this concept of following her to adulthood, because it was sort of clear that that just to follow her for a few weeks or a few months into her time in Germany wasn't going to tell us very much, because that would still be just a very early adjustment period. And what would be truly amazing would be to sort of see how this works out for her long term, and that's why we set out on this sort of crazy idea to spend a decade of our lives filming this.
Y en cuanto a la segunda parte de la pregunta, bueno, la parte del trayecto pues es muy potente, muy poderoso. En ese momento había una gran conversación en los medios en cuanto a este éxodo, ¿no?, de 1 millón de personas que estaban yendo a Europa, pero nos parecía que a ambos lados del debate pues no era muy matizada la conversación. Nos parecía que estaba mal informado, que no era muy sensible también con la realidad de estos refugiados. Nos dimos cuenta con el paso del tiempo, de los días, que nos volvimos muy cercanos y muy apegados a Isra. Queríamos seguirla viendo, seguir formando parte de su vida y que ella formara parte de la nuestra, y ahí fue donde se nos ocurrió la idea de seguirla hacia su adultez. Conforme fue, porque no, pensamos que pasar solamente unas semanas o unos meses con ella ya instalada en Alemania, pues no nos iba a decir mucho, porque simplemente era parte de este periodo de ajuste. Entonces aquí fue donde nos pareció maravilloso tener un seguimiento de ella a largo plazo, y tuvimos esta idea, que fue una locura, de seguir este viaje o esta película durante 10 años.
Considered doing this was down to the closeness of the relationship we felt we had with her and this family, and I think I'm not sure it would have been something we could have done if we set it out as a concept and then tried to find someone to do that with. I think it wouldn't have worked. I think it just felt right and it felt natural, because really by the time we were spending time with them in Germany, I mean, she used to call me Uncle Jack and Auntie Tab, and we were sort of almost part of the family, and it felt almost cruel not to be going back there. And then we're filmmakers, and so I was keenly aware that we were inside this Syrian family. This conservative Syrian families are, can be very shy about, especially women, about revealing themselves on screen. And it's almost felt like a bit of a duty that we have this access. They're very comfortable with the camera, and we can do it. And in terms of the process, I mean, the process evolved a lot over time. Because in 10 years of your own life, you change as a person, you change as a filmmaker. We did. We were sort of childless and fancy-free when we started. Now we've got a 5-year-old boy, and so to begin with, it was very relaxed, and we were there quite a lot of the time, and we would just be spending time in their house and filming some of the time. As we kind of moved forward, we started to get more a sense of what the story was. Once the events happened between her and her father, we sort of realised this might be where the story is, and we then, sometimes we had to split up to film things, and we obviously were keeping in constant touch with Isra and her family, sort of to be aware of what was going on and feel if it was an important time to go. And then sometimes we just got lucky, like we were in Germany to meet Tarek and talk to Tarek about doing some more filming with him, because we hadn't filmed with him for a while. And it was on that day that the Syrian regime fell. And so we happened to be there on the spot when that happened, and it was the only time we'd ever been to Cologne without a camera. And so we had to call everyone we knew in Germany to say, does anyone know someone with a camera? Because it's Sunday and nothing happens in Germany on a Sunday. So we eventually managed to do that. So that was an example of it just being lucky, but it's a really hard thing to set out to do, because obviously we're doing other projects while we're doing this. You can't make a life out of doing one film for 10 years unless you're an eccentric millionaire. And so it was a constant act of balancing, of trying to find space for this project alongside other things we're doing more short term, and I don't know if we'll ever repeat it, but it felt like something that came out of a particular moment at a particular time.